We've all been feeling exhausted from being on back-to-back Zoom calls. And an idea that I got interested in last week was really thinking about whether this could be an opportunity for us to practice our listening skills instead of just focusing on the visual aspects all the time. And so today I'm really excited to talk to a friend and mentor for the Marketing Academy, Oscar Trimboli, who is also an expert in listening and has written a book called Deep Listening. So thanks for having a chat for me today, Oscar.
G'day, Sean. Looking forward to listening to your questions.
Fantastic. Now, there's three things I really thought would be awesome to cover for people today. And the first is really, I guess, to look at the science aspects of why we're feeling so exhausted and what the opportunity might be if we focus more on our ears versus our mouth and our eyes. The second is really about, I guess, from your experience, Oscar, what is the real true benefits, I guess, of focusing on developing our listening skills, especially in a time when we're so distracted? And then the third one, I'd really love to give people just some really practical tips that they can take away today and basically immediately start to take a little bit more control over their energy and hopefully deal less with this constant exhaustion that I'm hearing from people. I've read a couple of really interesting articles recently, one from the BBC and one from National Geographic, of all places, which just really show that psychologically there's a lot going on with Zoom calls. One, we have to be way more present. The delays and things like that make things feel a lot more unnatural, I guess. I even read that we're more likely to negatively view people through video than we are in real life. Just wondering, how are you experiencing things in the work that you do?
Look, in the work I do, the first thing we want to do is making Zoom the villain is useful, but it's not really productive. We need to make a choice. We need to choose what modality is going to support us for the kinds of decisions we're going to make, or if it's an information sharing kind of meeting. I think too many of us fall into the default of our calendars. Our calendars say it's a half an hour meeting, or our calendars say it's a 1 hour meeting. Therefore, it's a 1 hour meeting. So choose a couple of things. Choose the modality. By that I mean, is it video, is it audio, is it a chat in a Slack channel or Yammer or Teams or something like that. Too many of us are just falling into a pattern now that we automatically make the meeting a video. Choose, be deliberate in your choice about what you do, and the choice you need to do is two things. If you know the communication preference of the person or the group you're with, Sean, then use that modality. And if you don't, ask the group or ask that person, what's the most effective way for us to have the conversation? Look, for a lot of us right now, some of the most useful things we can do is pattern interrupt. So if you're jumping into a team meeting, as an example, and the choice is Zoom, then start off with some music. Like, break it up so that you've got a pattern interrupt. The other thing is, I'm working with clients that are doing up to 15 meetings a day via video conference. And the thing they all reflect on when I talk them through it is their head hurts, they're jarred mentally, they're jarred physically, they're jarred spiritually, and it's because they're giving up their power to their calendar. So choose is really critical. And I think for me, how I'm experiencing it and where it's tough for me is doing online facilitation, which is a different modality again. And for me, the maximum I can keep someone's attention on a particular topic, maximum, the neuroscience tells us this, 7 minutes.
Mm.
We have to switch modalities then, move into Q&A, breakout rooms, whatever the case may be. Now, if you know that you can only hold someone's attention for 7 minutes and we're logged into a call for an hour, where do you think everybody's mind's going during the other, 53 minutes of a call? It's drifting off to, what are they having for lunch? What didn't they have for breakfast? That coffee was great. That coffee was rubbish. I should have got a juice instead. And it's happening for you right now listening to Sean and I. You're drifting off and you're distracted because we speak at 125 words a minute, but we can listen at 400 words a minute. So we have peripheral vision, Sean, but we also have peripheral hearing. So we're genetically programmed to be distracted. So we should acknowledge that, and we should anticipate that when we come into meetings. The default for a video conference might be everybody switches on their webcam, but there's another choice you want to think about. Do you turn your webcam on? And as a host, how do you have breaks if the meeting does need to go for an hour? I've been a participant and I've been a host where every 15 minutes, I ask everybody to switch their webcams off, their mics off to mute, and come back in 5 minutes with a 5 minute countdown clock. And everybody loves it. I've been a participant in another one where for 5 minutes we did push-ups and we did stretches, and push-ups were whichever way we did it. You know, nobody was paying attention. But it was a great way for the host to role model how you bring energy to a conversation there. So that's what my world feels like at the moment. I'm kind of flip-flopping between freaking out and figuring it out, to be honest, Sean.
I think that's a lot for all of us, right? Is that we're all learning right now, and I think one of the biggest things we can do is be kind to ourselves, and actually, as you said, to make a choice, reflect on how that meeting felt or how that day felt, and then based on those reflections, actually start to try and experiment with some different choices. I really love that idea, I guess, of also making that active choice about whether you're going to turn your video on, because I think that there is that sort of social expectation that we might have that we all need to be having our videos on.
I've got
One of
clients who are sharing their workspace with their kids, with dogs, with cats, with parents. Not everybody has the luxury of a home office. Not everybody has the luxury of a quiet space. And again, I think as hosts, one of the things a host can do is just ask and check in with everybody. You know, what's the workspace that's around you right now? What do we need to be aware of to support you to be successful? And in this time where our modality isn't as visual and as present as the state it might be in an office, in a meeting room setting, we need to make the implicit explicit in everything we do. We need check-ins that go, how's your energy coming into the meeting? What's the best method to do that kind of check-in, by the way, Sean? What's a good question for checking in on energy?
I think that I think one of the best things we can do, right, as you said, is if you give people a way to come into the meeting where it feels different right from the start. You know, if you give people permission to share where they're at, as you said, like they might, like, so for me, for instance, one of the things I've been saying is in terms of how I manage my anxiety sometimes especially when I'm delivering workshops, is that, you know, there's some things you can't control, right? So if the postman turns up in the middle, I have to go and get the post. So sometimes even just sharing some of those things, just getting them off your chest, I think is a really great way to do that. I think giving permission as well to, you know, when I've had clients and the kids have come through, I've said, I want to talk to the kids, you know, introduce them, you know, those types of things as well. I think there is something lovely in that we are getting an opportunity to get to know each other a little bit better as well. But on the inverse, I think what we're saying here too is that, you know, if you don't feel like sharing, if you don't feel like showing everything that day, then that should be completely fine as well. I think one of the things that I've been encouraging people to do is, again, just share that. They can just say, look, I'm not going to switch my video on today, guys. You know, I just need to give my brain a bit of a break so that I can really focus on listening what's going into the conversation and stay focused. And I think once we do that, you know, there's nothing, I think we just got to overcome those social expectations. One of the things I was talking about with another client today too, is that we're all forming new habits right now. And especially because we know, you know, a habit might take, depending on what the research is that you read, you know, anywhere between sort of a couple of weeks to 60 days to really form. But are we forming healthy habits? Right? That's the question that we need to be aware of. And I guess, are we being really present to the fact that we might be gotten into, you know, a rhythm or a habit that's not really serving us overall?
Yeah. A really simple habit one of my leaders explained to their group. She's a beautiful role model of what a leader is. Although she booked the meetings on the hour, she tells everybody and takes them through a very simple switch your webcams off, close your eyes, put your feet on the ground, and we're just going to take some deep breaths. And for 2 minutes, it just brings the room to a state of presence to go, what's the intention for this meeting? Now, it's no surprise that when Amy does those meetings, they're less than half an hour. because everybody's completely present. They're kind of invigorated and refreshed to do that. Back in 2014, 2015, Google implemented a practice where if you had more than 6 people in a meeting, they took you through a guided meditation for 2 minutes. That was the most commented on thing in their employee engagement survey in that year, and how productive that was. So I think as leaders, that's whether it's capital L leader or little l leader, we're all leaders. And whether we're hosts or participants, we can all lead the dialogue. I think one of the other things we not conscious of, Sean, is are we hearing from everybody on the call, and how deliberate are we about listening to those who aren't comfortable in speaking up? And that's not to cold call on people and say, well, what do you think? I think one of the things that people say is that if you ask people who aren't comfortable to speak up about their opinion, the psychological trust is low when you ask those kinds of questions, as opposed to asking them what do they think about the themes they've heard today. They often are great synthesizers of the themes. So one of the really powerful questions to draw people in who haven't spoken, whether they're on video or just audio only, is, Sean, I'm curious what you're making of the key topic from today, as opposed to, Sean, what do you think about this? It's a very different intention. It also creates a different awareness for the group when they see another person's perspective there as well. When we researched 3 weeks ago now, it feels like a lifetime, 523 people, about their distractions, or what are the derailers that get in the way of video conferences. The first one is absolutely both physical and mental distractions. I would have thought that technology would have been number one, but in fact, technology, connectivity, the webcam placement, the audio quality was third, fourth, and fifth. It wasn't big in the list. By far the biggest one, over 80% of people said they were distracted.
Mm.
As leaders, again, we have to think about how do we make the implicit explicit, and ask people what could they anticipate might distract them today. For you, it's your post arriving. It could be kids. It could be the fact that, anything else is going on. The dog might jump across the table. The cat and the dog might fight. And these are all things I've seen in video conferences I've been in the last 6 weeks, Sean. What's been the most interesting distraction you've anticipated?
Um, I think that the ones that have actually been the most joyful is just when I've seen a little head pop up somewhere. I've seen people working in bedrooms and hallways and all these sorts of things, and I just think that it's those lovely human moments, I think, that I've really enjoyed, and I think it's a great way just to get to know each other on a different level. Yeah, I think the distraction things is a big one, right? As you said, like, our brains are sort of hardwired to be distracted. I always joke to people that our brains love to go into screensaver mode, right? And we know that that's just, again, from a biological point of view, right? Just based on the amount of energy our brains require compared to the actual weight they are. I love all those little ideas, I guess, of bringing people back into the room and holding people present. And I think the cadence that you talked about as well, is being aware of that when you're delivering things, that 7 minutes is really as long as you should be staying on one topic.
Yep.
One of the other things I'm really interested in is about, you said, making a choice about the modality that you would like to use, right? And so coming back to the type of conversation, the type of meeting it might be, one of the interesting pieces of research I've heard as well is that when we actually close our eyes and listen, that allows us to maybe be more present, because it's requiring a lot less brain power, essentially,
Yeah.
right, to do that. Is a particular type of conversation that you think that might be appropriate for?
Yeah, I do this exercise where I play the air traffic controller talking to Captain Sullenberg on that famous United flight
Wow.
at workshops that I run. And it's very noticeable to me. So I basically say to people, what's the flight number of the call from the air traffic control to Sullenberg? And the air traffic controller and the pilot get the flight number wrong 3 times. They actually call completely different flight numbers. And the people who get the flight number right, meaning the answer was 3, it wasn't 1, because everybody calls out a different number, are usually people in the audience who close their eyes or put their hands over their eyes to remove all the distractions around them. The opposite is true too for blind people. Blind people can listen to audio books at 2.5 times speed, some up to 3 times speed with complete comprehension.
Mm.
So yes, I would say there is a reason when you presence yourself, the act of closing your eyes. So before I got onto this meeting with you, I have a 5-minute ritual that I go through, and I sit down, I put my feet on the ground, I drink water, I close my eyes for 5 minutes, I take some deep breaths, and I presence myself to go, what is it that I have to offer? What's my invitation to be helpful in that moment? And I think for all of us, the 3 most practical things we can do is switch off notifications or cell phones or mobile phones or whatever your drug of choice is when it comes to distraction. If you've got a Slack channel running up with things that beep and bing and visual notifications, just switch it off. Every operating system now has a very simple way to switch off all notifications in one little finger move.
Mm.
So that will remove 80% of your distraction possibilities. We are going to be distracted because even this conversation that you and I are having are distracting people. The second one is drink water. A hydrated brain is a listening brain, is an effective brain. So drink a glass of water every half an hour, trying to get between 2 to 3 liters of water in your system during the day. And by the way, coffee isn't the only way to drink water. But the science is really simple, Sean, because the brain, 5% of the body mass, yet it consumes 26% of blood sugars. The fastest way to get blood sugars to the brain is through the process of hydration. So drink water. Encourage others on the call to drink water. And the very act of you drinking water will pause, short circuit the conversation and give people a very big visual signal to go, okay, now it's time to drink some water. And if it's audio only, then you can just say, hey, just bear with me. I'm just going to grab a sip of water right now. And the third one you've just mentioned earlier on is the role of breathing.
Mm.
A hydrated brain is a listening brain. An oxygenated brain is a listening brain. So anything you can do to get oxygen to the brain, it's simple act of breathing in through your nose, down the back of your throat, all the way to the bottom of your lungs, and then out through your mouth. Now, I'm not saying you have to breathe like a weightlifter or a yoga or a yogi, but just the act when you know you're distracted, and it will happen, just simply take a breath. And that will connect very differently to your nervous system, which will send a very different signal to the back of the limbic system in the brain about you becoming present. 3 breaths most times is going to present you back into the conversation. So notifications off, drink water, and breathe deeply.
Wonderful. I love that. And one of the pieces of research that we've actually been doing ourselves is when we've been running our masterclasses, we've been asking people around their emotional states. Well, and so on the spectrum of fear to flow. So through fear, stress, and anxiety, feeling frustrated, just being in survival, and then getting to clarity and confidence, peak performance, and flow. And what we found is about 80% of people are below that threshold of clarity and confidence. So we're in an emotional state that's sort of impacting their, their productivity, their creativity, all of these sorts of things. As we're sort of talking, I feel like this focus on listening actually might be a strategy as well to help people, I guess, deal with some of those emotional feelings too, if they're becoming more present.
The biggest barrier to listening is actually not your ability to focus on the speaker, Sean. The biggest barrier is the noise in your own head. Most of us turn up with a radio station playing or multiple browser tabs still open from the previous conversation. We need to find a technique to shut them down because we've got 1,410 people we're tracking in our database of listeners for 3 years now. And the biggest thing they say they get distracted with is self-talk.
I will get that, yeah.
And it's happening for you right now. It's happening for me right now. It's happening for anybody who's watching or listening right now. But those 3 techniques of switch off the physical external distractions, whether that's notifications, text messages or whatever, breathe and drink water, they're still going to help you become present to the conversation. And there's no surprise that there's an overlap with ancient wisdom here. There's an overlap with the modern mindfulness movement here. All these techniques are very common outside of the West, whether that's in China or Japan or in India or Korea, or ancient cultures that are still tribally based in Africa or South America, or the Inuit tribes of North America, or the Maori or the Australian Aborigines. All of them have techniques to respect silence. And silence is a sign of wisdom, and it's a sign of authority, and it's a sign of respect. But in the West, when we think about silence, we call it the pregnant pause, the awkward silence, the deafening silence. We have this weird relationship with silence. So when you think about listening, when you're coming into a conference, audio or video, listening happens before you arrived in. It happens during the conversation. It also happens after the conversation as well, because listening is the act of taking action, and listening during the conversation is the willingness to have your mind changed. So for a lot of us, I'm not saying you have to turn up to have your mind changed, but it's the willingness to have your mind changed. That means it's open to ideas.
Fantastic. And so I think that's a really important point to make, right? Is around, often we're dealing with a little bit of technology delay in the conversations as well. So, which wouldn't be happening. And plus we'd have all these other body language signals, I guess, to pick up on as well if we were actually in the same room with each other.
Mm.
What advice would you give people for dealing with that little bit of delay?
So again, it's make the implicit explicit. If you're hosting a meeting, so I'm about to ask you a question about the impact of distraction, and I'm going to ask you each whether you have it before, during, or after. So first we're going to go to Sean, then we're going to go to Samantha, then we're going to go to Stephen. Is everyone clear on the order? Great. So that gives everybody, oh, okay, well, I know where I am in the order. The host has made the implicit explicit. And you don't keep the same order all the time, but in signaling, so what happens in a physical space there, Sean, I would nod to you as I would ask the question, which would be a nonverbal signal to go, Sean's going first. And then I would turn to Samantha, and then I would talk to Stephen, right? But in video, we don't have all those signals, so we need to go around the room. Okay, so hosts need to curate and hold that space in a much more explicit way than they have in the past. The opposite is true too, by the way, Sean. A host should be creating a space of pause as well. Before we think about this question, what I'm going to ask you to do, just switch your webcams off, switch your mics to mute, and just make a personal reflection right now. It's for 2 minutes, and I want you to reflect on this question. When we come back, we'll go to Stephen, Samantha, and then Sean. So we're mixing up the modalities there, but we're also getting people not just to listen to what somebody else is saying, but to listen to themselves. If I was doing that in a group, I'd never work with Sean. I would do the reflective exercise first because it gives them a bit of confidence and builds up trust. It also takes away the visual stimulus, which is completely frying our heads at the moment, because our neuroscience, we're firing up new neurons, and it's like going to the gym where you've never done weights on your glutes, and all of a sudden you've got to do glute exercises, and those clamshells really hurt at the moment. That's what I'm trying to do right now. Specific glute exercises for me as I'm practicing for a marathon. But building up and giving people the confidence to bring themselves to the space by just doing a personal reflection without having to have the dialogue consistently like a billiard table where the billiard balls are just firing off each other all the time. That is mentally taxing.
Totally. I think that's just, as you're saying that, so I think there is one thing that wouldn't be socially acceptable necessarily in a, in a live situation, but actually within video calls it is, and that's using the chat box as well.
Yeah.
So one of the things that, as a bit of a like, how's everyone feeling, because I think that like one of the things I've been doing at the start of my meetings is just getting people to type into the chat box what they're grateful for.
Yeah.
And just seeing everyone do that all at once creates a sense of energy as well, and some social, a good social pressure, I guess, in a way to contribute. But I love that. I guess the big theme that's coming through today is really about making the implicit explicit.
Yeah.
Right? Being really clear on the contribution that you want people to make. And I think that's really important just in terms of normal meeting etiquette,
Yeah.
right? If you don't expect a contribution from someone, then they shouldn't be in the meeting in the first place, right? Don't ask them to be there. And I love this idea, I guess, of just giving those, being aware of that cadence, and giving some breaks, like choreographing that in. And I think it's really showing that like we've been asked to step up, I guess, in our meeting skills here. Maybe we've got away with a lot of bad habits before, but here's an opportunity to practice some good habits.
Ironically, the implicit has been made explicit by the fact everything's on video now. So, if we got all these recordings into some intergalactic calculator in the sky and looked at all the great meetings and all the not so great meetings, now the implicit is explicit because those meetings were happening in meeting rooms there as well. As a leader, one of the things I would say right now is your ability to communicate is more important than ever, but make how you communicate and what you communicate matter. Frequency needs to go up, but faff needs to go down.
100%. I feel like people are like overwhelmed with information right now, and misinformation as well. And so, as you said, like making sure it's really purposeful. We've definitely been focused on making sure that with our clients that communications are only really around capability, because it's like, unless you're actually helping people build a skill to deal with the current context, then it just becomes information. And if people just don't have cognitively the ability to take that in, then it's going to be, it's going to potentially add to their overwhelm.
Yeah. And for me, Sean, in my one-on-one work, we've spent a lot of time talking about group. The thing that's really helpful for me right now, the 3 questions that I think matter the most: what does sleep mean to you right now? What does exercise mean to you right now? And what does nutrition mean to you right now? Those 3 questions are a rapid portal into the reality of where somebody's mindset is at, and whether they're struggling with sleep or I was talking to a client 3 weeks ago. I spoke to her at 4 p.m. I said, her sleep was great, her exercise was great. And I said, how are you going with your eating? What does lunch look like? What does dinner look like? And she said, well, Oscar, I'm going to out myself. At 2 o'clock, I found 3 packets of Tim Tams and I've completely demolished them with 3 espressos. And she says, I know I'm going to have a sugar crash at some point. It feels really good to eat it at the moment. I know it's the absolute wrong thing, but now I've got those Tim Tams completely out of my home. I'm never going to buy them again. And that became an interesting discussion about addictive behavior. So the initial conversation is interesting, but it just gives you an in as a leader or as a friend to be able to have the conversation that matters rather than the superficial conversation.
I love that. I think that's so important as we go through. I think one of the things I've been looking at globally is we're seeing this thing that we're calling the 40-day slump, which is that 40 to 50 from working from home full time. And I guess one of my hypotheses as to why we're doing this is there's a point where that just how are you conversation doesn't really do it anymore, right? And so having more purposeful self-care conversations that don't mean that I have to admit, that everything's sort of crashing down around. At least I can just say, yeah, sleep, I need to do that. I need to make sure I'm getting that. I need to make sure I'm moving, getting some D. I need to really, again, coming back to taking responsibility for these decisions, which are ultimately going to impact my energy overall.
Yeah.
Just on that, one of the ones that I've been saying to people too is choose maybe a couple of meetings a day where you're going to do something different, right? So as we've talked about here, is focusing on listening, or it could be doing a walking meeting, as you said, especially if you've got one-on-ones and those types of things, which allow you just to go out and think on your feet and have a conversation and be present. Are there any other, I'm just conscious of time for us here today, but are there any other tips that you would give that are like very simple for people practically to implement into their days?
Yeah, I think the big one is really simply ask each other the question, how do we make our meetings more productive in the last 10% of the meeting? So too much of the meeting is about dialogue and what and the content and all of that. But we are in a cadence, as you mentioned, Sean, we're at the 40 to 50 day mark, however you measure these things. how can we make these meetings more productive is a really powerful question anybody in the group can ask, and ask it in the last 10% of the meeting. So if the meeting's 30 minutes long, make sure you're asking it about the 20-minute mark. Otherwise, we'll just come back to it at the 50-minute mark in a 1 hour meeting, or just pose it as a chat in the window or as a follow-up email. Too many leaders don't build process muscle. They focus too much on content and not enough on context. So leadership is not just all capital L leadership. I've got the title, I'm the manager. It's across the groups as well. So we can all ask those questions. How could we make this meeting more productive? And that's where the answers come up. You know, we haven't even talked about the most important topic. We haven't even talked about the thing that matters to our customers the most at the moment. And in that, although it's content driven, all of a sudden we need to ask ourselves, how well is the agenda serving us at the moment? Because agendas may have been fixed in the past. I think agendas need to be asked is, next time we have this meeting, is this agenda going to be effective for us? So I think just questioning how to improve the process of the meeting, do that as a group, do that as individuals. I think that'll make a huge difference because we'll learn faster. And that's all we're in. We're in one giant experiment right now, Sean. And the most important thing we can do is be open to learning, to be open to improving, and to be open to being completely wrong. I love playing with the duality of I don't know anything and I know everything, and how do we juggle those two things at the same time?
Yeah, fantastic. So much great advice in there, Oscar. I want to thank you again for joining me with this little idea that I just had on the back of the week. I think there is a really great opportunity for us right now to really develop our deep listening skills. If you're just meeting Oscar for the first time, definitely check out his podcast and his book. Thanks again, Oscar. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks for listening.